On the 4th of July, 2026, the United States will mark its 250th anniversary. Today, it stands as a global hegemon of 340 million people. But the history of the continent stretches back thousands of years before that. In the floodplains of the Mississippi River, advanced indigenous societies built cities like Cahokia to sustain tens of thousands of people, making them larger than many European capitals of the same era. That timeline severed at the end of the 15th century. European explorers arrived in search of a Western trade route to Asia, but quickly pivoted to colonizing this landmass to extract its resources, making brutal compromises to survive the harsh new environment. We see the mechanics of this in early settlements like Jamestown. By 1612, colonists planted a Caribbean strain of tobacco that generated massive profits back in England. Scaling that production meant they needed an immediate, continuous supply of cheap agricultural labor. In August 1619, a vessel named the White Lion sailed into Virginia and sold the first documented enslaved Africans into servitude. The American project anchored itself to an institution of forced labor decades before it even claimed to be a nation. Then, in 1776, leaders gathered in Philadelphia to draft a document declaring their independence. They explicitly wrote down a bold thesis that anyone could cast off tyranny and claim life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A republic explicitly founded on universal liberty, but physically and economically fueled by the subjugation of millions of people. Reconciling those incompatible truths is the friction that drove the country's rise to its current status. Following the Revolutionary War, the fragile new government inherited the original 13 colonies. To pay off heavy war debts and avoid financial collapse, it needed to rapidly push west to secure more agricultural land. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 doubled the size of the nation overnight, pushing the frontier to the Rocky Mountains. By 1848, the Mexican-American War forcefully transferred 500,000 square miles, extending it entirely to the Pacific coast. To secure this vast new footprint, the federal government authorized the removal of indigenous tribes. Throughout the 1830s, the Cherokee, Creek, and others were force-marched along the Trail of Tears to designated Western territories, with thousands dying from exposure and starvation along the way. The emptied land left behind in the Deep South was immediately converted into the primary engine of early American macroeconomic power, the cotton plantation system. By 1830, that agricultural wealth relied on the extraction of labor from over 2 million enslaved people. The rapid growth of both the physical borders and the slave economy placed the country's founding paradox under a degree of pressure that successive political compromises failed to resolve. Every new Western state admitted to the Union forced the government to decide whether that territory would permit slavery or be free. This drew a hard line between the industrialized North and the agrarian South. When Abraham Lincoln won the presidency in 1860 on a Republican platform dedicated to halting the expansion of slavery, Southern states rapidly seceded, triggering the American Civil War. 4 years and over 600,000 casualties later, the Union victory produced the 13th Amendment. By formally abolishing slavery, the government made its first constitutional attempt to align its laws with its 1776 ideals. With the war over, the reunited republic aggressively redirected its logistical capabilities toward infrastructure. In 1869, the completion of the first transcontinental railroad connected the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, collapsing journey times from months to days. A connected geography allowed for the rapid extraction of coal, iron, and oil. Factories introduced assembly line manufacturing, mass-producing goods and generating massive, concentrated wealth for a new class of business tycoons. But this unregulated greed carried structural vulnerabilities. On October 19, 1929, the New York Stock Exchange collapsed, wiping out billions of dollars overnight and causing bank failures across the country. By 1933, the resulting Great Depression left a quarter of the entire American workforce unemployed. Desperate citizens had to rely on breadlines and government-sponsored infrastructure projects just to survive. Industrial output and rapid wealth generation alone were insufficient to guarantee national resilience without deeper systemic reforms to protect the society that built it. The economic depression lingered until the strike on Pearl Harbor in 1941. This ended American isolationism, dragging its dormant industrial engine into the Second World War. The United States revitalized itself into a wartime production machine. This sprint culminated in the secret development of nuclear weapons, resulting in the destruction at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which forced Japan's surrender. Emerging from the conflict, the United States stood as one of two global superpowers, projecting democratic influence across the globe to counter the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Yet, while projecting a fight for global freedom abroad, millions of Black Americans suffered under violent Jim Crow segregation laws at home. Through the 1950s and 60s, the civil rights movement systematically exposed this discrimination. Protests and boycotts forced the federal government to confront segregation as a defining moral issue. The monumental scale of social pressure applied by these citizens successfully secured the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, tearing down the legal framework of segregation. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union collapsed, leaving the United States as the undisputed, preeminent superpower of the modern world. This history reveals a nation defined by its chaotic and continuous internal evolution, a 250-year struggle to execute the promise of liberty it first put to paper in 1776.